So welcome to the first Think Ahead event of 2024, Leading with Purpose in Turbulent Times. Think Ahead is London Business School's topical event and podcast series, in which London Business School's leading faculty and other global experts explore today's big business issues. I'm Randall Peterson. I'm Professor of Organizational Behavior at London Business School and Academic Director of the Leadership Institute. I'll be your host for the evening. Today we will explore the challenges faced by leaders during times of crisis and uncertainty, and hear recommendations and suggestions from leading London Business School faculty and global industry practitioners on how best to manage teams through times of volatility and stress. So, to start today's event, we have a question for the audience. So, get onto Slido on your screen, select your answer to the following question. So, what is the key to successful leadership during turbulent times? Is it, number one, sticking to a clear plan? Number two, being reactive and adaptable? Three, acting consistent with one's values? Or four, having an ethos of take care of others? So, as the results come in, I'd like to introduce you to my panel. I'm pleased to welcome David Farrow. He's an Associate Professor of Marketing at London Business School and teaches a class on crisis management. Priya Mande is CEO of Stealth Biotech and previously Deputy Director of UK COVID-19 Vaccine Task Force. And Chris Averill, an entrepreneur and a business now and leadership coach. So, results are in. So, as we look at the results here, it looks like we have a very strong showing for being reactive and adaptive, and rather less interest, particularly in sticking to a plan, having an ethos of take care of others. Okay? So we'll see as the conversation happens whether maybe we might change your opinion along the way. Let's see. So we want to keep this quite interactive. There'll be an opportunity for you to put your questions to our panel. Please, can you submit your questions via Slido using the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen. So welcome again to our panel. And we're going to have each panelist just give us a short introduction of your background, why you're here this evening. So David, if I can start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Randall. So as you said, I'm an associate professor at the London Business School in the Department of Marketing. So Randall is in organizational behavior. I've been in the school for 18 years now. Probably you are longer, but and my research looks at people's decision making, especially in domains like health and finance. I've been also recently interested in pro-social behavior, how to make people donate to social causes. Like Randall said, I teach a course on crisis leadership. I taught marketing for many years, including branding, and I also teach behavioral economics. What all these courses have in common is interest in human behavior. So I was trained as a behavioral scientist. I'm interested in people's kind of mistakes, tendencies, let's say, not always mistakes, but some kind of tendencies they might exhibit during certain situations, especially in crisis. I work with companies as well as NGOs. So, for example, for my class that I teach at the moment, we're working with 4 NGOs on issues such as education for refugees, peace building through meditation and yoga, and animal safety.
Great. Thank you, David. Priya.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you again to London Business School for the invitation and opportunity to participate on this inaugural event. So I'm Priya Mande. I'm an alumnus of London Business School, Gemba 2002. As you've already alluded to, I've got 30 years of life science experience across Big Pharma, Glaxo, Pfizer and others, as well as biotech and government. So I'm a life sciences executive. I'm currently CEO of a stealth biotech. So it's a startup company that we will be launching very soon. Very exciting new technology that's coming through. I'm privileged to be leading a team around that. And I've had the opportunity over 3 decades to lead teams and organizations through times of change, transformational growth, and crises as well as peacetime. So I'm looking forward to the discussion this evening, so that hopefully I can share some of my insights and some of my some anecdotes as well. The peacetimes haven't been that long, because actually companies are always constantly in a state of flux and change, as it should be, as they respond to the evolving macroeconomic and global sort of impacts of society.
Great, thank you and welcome, Priya. Chris.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me along. I guess my background is slightly different from yourselves. I come from a less of an institutional, large corporate world. I come from more of an entrepreneurial, startup, scale-up and business ownership world. So I'm kind of feel a little honoured to be here today to share my views. I hope my views will come in as helpful and slightly different. My experience has been leading my organisation over 15, 16 years through a number of very difficult financial times, downturns, and I think a lot of my leadership style was quite poor when I was running my company. So I learned a lot from making mistakes, and the best thing I did was I was very lucky to exit my company and then be able to step back and help others who are leading businesses. And I've learned a lot more about good leadership and what makes a good leader and what good leadership skills are, particularly in turbulent times as we've been through recently, by observing. So for me, I'm very, very lucky to be able to stand back and observe really what my life was and help others improve the things that I did, hands up, quite badly at points. So yeah, great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation and some of the questions from the audience and seeing if we can help people be better leaders.
All right, great, thank you and welcome, Chris, and I'm sure we're going to learn from that. All right, there are three broad issues I thought we'd talk about here this evening. The first one is really about what are the risks, why are we here, why is a turbulent time worthy of our attention. Then we might talk a little bit about maybe what are the opportunities in it. There's always opportunity in turbulence. And then maybe what are the take-home messages we would share with people about their own leadership in turbulent times. So let's kick off with a conversation about, so why are we here? What are the issues in terms of turbulent times? Priya, I think you were going to start.
Yes, so I thought the answer, the responses to the earlier question was very insightful. So we talk about risk in terms of risk management, and as any good organisational leader will know, one should have some sort of business plan. Where are we trying to get to? Because then we can all make sure that we're actually on the right course, and that but it has to be very flexible, and we have to respond to emergent strategy. Change is a constant, and we have to learn to evolve and adapt. So I think actually, from my perspective, the ideal response would have been an amalgamation of the reactive and adaptable, as well as the having a plan in place. So risk management really leads me to think around the sort of organisational that I'm trying to build and have been trying to build in the past, which is around building organisational resilience. I think it's a very important phrase. It's around having risk management practices. It's about being able to thrive, being able to adapt, being flexible, but knowing where one's going. Going back to the point that change is a constant. In a previous company, when we were hitting one crisis in particular, which was COVID, you mentioned that I was on the UK vaccine task force, but I was also concurrently at the time a C-suite of an immuno-oncology biotech company in the UK. And I was fulfilling both roles. And I coined this phrase, walk the risk, run the plan. So basically asked my team to walk through every potential risk. We were running global clinical trials, and everything from sites being converted from cancer therapies to now suddenly being infectious disease units, to the lack of face masks, the ability to secure consumables and reagents, the whole number of risks, staff not being able to get on site, and then to develop a contingency plan around that. That wasn't to say that we were going to be completely rigorous around that and rigid around that plan, but it was just to give us a path to navigate. It was give us an ability to identify the guardrails so we know how we're doing. And to give you an example about why that's important, security protocols, for example, cybersecurity. So we actually had an incident whereby in the early days of COVID, there was some scaremongering and rumour mill was going into overtime that the military were going to come in and sequester our PCR machines, our very expensive equipment. So everyone will remember their PCR that you had to do to see if you had COVID or not. And obviously, as a laboratory, as a biotech, we had a whole range of analytical development machines and methodology kits, etc. Actually, I can say that that wasn't the case. The military weren't coming in. But of course, the point was, you know, folks are alarmed. There's anxiety, trepidation, dare I say panic. And at that time, it's very important to have some sort of security protocols and to have a bit of a plan. As it was, as so happened, actually, there was opportunistic thieving that was going on. And so, you know, at the time, you know, vans, not quite the A-team, but vans were going around and people were professing to be the military and taking, and, you know, there was this opportunistic thieving taking equipment out of labs. So, you know, again, that's why I think it's very important to build that organisational resilience.
Great, thank you. Chris, David?
Yeah, sure. Off the back of, I promise not to nick your phrase used earlier, unless you don't use it, and I will.
Okay, fine.
I think one of the big risks that I've certainly experienced myself firsthand in coaching other business leaders is a lot around the communication and opportunity. So the risk that we perceive is our business is going to fail. That we're going to run out of money, that financials become a focal point for organisations, large and small. And we're not looking at the opportunity that presents itself within that change. Risk is a great driver for innovation. You know, when the chips are down, when business is tough, it's that it creates focus. And when times are good, we tend to be very relaxed in the way we operate, the things we do. There's no money issues. Recruitment's great. You know, we're kind of stuffed full of good food and not waiting for anything bad to happen. So when it does happen, what I've seen firsthand is that we can be quite reactive and we can respond, we can change that plan as it fails, as you mentioned in our earlier conversation, it fails at first contact with the enemy. But the big risk here is that we forget what we learned during that time of crisis. And a couple of years later, we cycle through the same mistakes again. We relax, we sit back and we don't innovate, we don't push ourselves and our organizations forwards. And part of that, I think, is just learned behavior. So what can we do to drive a different way of leading in the organization? Who can we look to in our organization to lead? Not necessarily those at the top, and we'll talk more a bit later on about that, and how can we use communication as a much more effective short and long-term tool to tell a story that people remember long-term and not forget how bad it was and just focus on how good it is.
Okay, great. David?
Yeah, thank you. Just to build off on some of the points you made, you talk about communication, Chris, and I think another lever could be how we incentivize people in the organization, like how we evaluate people, you know, normal times as well as crisis times. You mentioned that during normal times, kind of there is general kind of safety. That people kind of feel very comfortable and actually don't innovate, don't try new things. So that's a risk during normal times.
Yeah.
One thing that I found doing some research on related things, that during crisis, people are worried about how they'll be evaluated and how they'll be judged. And they're worried, maybe for good reasons, that they'll be judged on whether they can deliver certain results. And I think that's a very natural worry, because you know, in crisis times we might think that we must reach certain kind of outcomes and results. We can think that the viability of our organization depends on reaching on those results. So these are natural reactions. The problem can be that if you believe that you'll be judged only by the results of what you do, you tend to be more worried about making a mistake.
You become more risk adverse.
Yeah, exactly. You become more risk averse. And risk taking is necessary for innovation. And in crisis, we need to come up with new ideas, with new solutions. So, kind of my research with some colleagues show that actually when people believe they'll be judged only by outcomes, they take less risk.
Yeah.
And I think crisis can make people worry about outcomes and think that they'll be judged only by outcomes as opposed to some principles, some rules, some guidelines, some values.
Is that because organisations? Sorry, do you mind if I ask a question? I know it's
please, yeah.
maybe very quickly. Is that because organisations are traditionally structured around that? The only measurement they really understand for their organisational behaviour is very kind of clear-cut scorecard type stuff.
Sure. So definitely there is a bias towards judging employees, managers by results. It's much more easy to document, easy to measure, easy to report, compared to, what is the process that we got there. That's more subjective, hard to articulate, hard to communicate. But still, I think, many companies that do lean in that direction, more companies, like you said, lean in the direction of outcomes and results. I guess what I would add lastly is that during crisis time, we lean even more in that direction of results and outcomes. And that ironically can reduce risk-taking, can reduce innovation, which is exactly the time we need to be innovative.
Excellent.
Great. So what I'm hearing is just when we need a little bit of innovation, the crisis puts it at risk, right? Those two things come together, right? That's the risk, that's the problem. And maybe we don't have the right risk, plan in place either. So we're kind of caught in the headlights, and now what, right? How do we pick up the pieces and do something? So why don't we move on to talking a little bit about maybe what the opportunities are here? So looking forward, what should we be looking for to happen? During a crisis, ideally.
Great
Chris.
question. Good. So what should we be doing during a crisis?
A lot of things.
Well, or maybe not. Actually, maybe just one thing. Maybe it's about changing what you've done before. Like I touched on, we tend to stick to a plan and then we'll learn and we'll go back to our old ways. So maybe it's just doing one thing. And one thing that is proven to work, that I've seen work a lot, is shifting the responsibility of decision making, of innovation down the organisation, like right down to the bottom. So the newest, youngest or most inexperienced people within your organisation are employed to set the strategy and direction of the business moving forwards, because that will reinvigorate and create new direction and be more risk-taking. I'm going to mess this up a little bit. It's the NASA space race Apollo moon mission that the average age in mission control was something like 26 or 28, and for most people in there, it's their first job outside of leaving university. And the reason it succeeded is they've never known risk. They've never operated in a business environment where risk has played out. So they're prepared to take much bigger risks because they didn't fear it. So push everything down the organisation, let the people at the bottom, the future CEOs, lead. And you'll have a completely different organisation that has a much longer lasting impact. And that way of working becomes the norm, not reverting back to the sort of more experienced people who've been there and done that, but keep getting us in the same hole. That's my view.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I mean, I think we talk about crises and turbulent times as quite a negative connotation, but it's actually about change. That's what the state is, and I think it can act as a catalyst for the opportunities. So talking about innovation, so and I recognise that I talked about the importance of having an understanding of the risks and having a risk plan. It's more about understanding what the opportunities are as you look at the risk mitigation. So what I mean by that is we know that innovation comes slightly from the margin of chaos. You need a little bit of ambiguity and a bit of chaos to be able to be truly entrepreneurial and build that innovation, an innovative mindset that goes back to the culture that we want to create as well into our organisations. And of course, one can't do that if you don't understand what the known unknowns are and the unknown unknowns. So that's what you're trying to do as you're trying to have these tools and systems and processes in place to try and be able to manage that culture. And I think, going back to the innovation, if you can look at it as an opportunity, as a catalyst, to be able to say, how can we use this opportunity to do things differently? And Randall, you circulated an HBR article which you've written around creativity and how actually there's this sort of threat rigidity, I think is the phrase, which when everyone's a bit sort of paralysed. And the other phrase that I would use is analysis paralysis. So in times of the unknown unknowns, everyone goes to data. And we saw a lot of that in COVID, and I'll harp back to COVID, but the stats on the news and, you know, all the graphs constantly and talking about infection rates. And actually, to be clear, there was a lot of unknowns at the beginning, a lot of data analysis, quite rightly so. Where that becomes problematic is when it actually paralyses anyone to making a decision. Because actually, the opportunity there is to say, we've got enough data, we need to move forward. And hindsight is always a marvellous thing. So we took the opportunity to look at, you know, understanding what was going on from a risk perspective was to then actually push boundaries and actually to be more innovative and to be more productive. But the reason we did that quite deliberately. It was actually a conscious recognition that we were going to have to work with the regulators to move things faster. We were going to have to let people work from home. We were going to have to protect certain staff as key workers who had to get into the labs. You know, there's some really foundational elements that decisions had to be made, and we couldn't drop to the lowest common denominator in case, you know, in terms of everyone. Is everyone happy with this decision? You know, one has to just move forward. So I think the opportunity there is to be innovative, to be decisive, and actually to try and test out new ways of working and new ideas and new products, and, you know, but within the parameters of whatever regulations one's operating in.
Yeah, I mean, the upside of when you're in a crisis is that people become more open to different ideas in one way. They're scared, they want to go back, they want reassurance, but at the same time it's like, well, if we think this will fix it, right? They also are willing to allow that maybe experimentation a bit in a way that maybe they wouldn't have in kind of more normal times.
A brilliant example is home working. I mean, I think pre-COVID it was sort of 3% of companies. I think post-COVID it's gone up to whatever the number is. But, you know, number of companies now showing that actually people can work from home, not permanently, but, you know, as a hybrid approach, that it doesn't, you know, drop off productivity completely as had been originally envisaged.
Not permanently because they're scared they're not going to be able to fill the seats in their offices that are very expensive and they need to show some value for because they're traditional.
I think that's probably it, and I think there is some mentality out there that says that if you're not sat at your desk 9 to 5, you're not working. But that's probably another session altogether.
Well, I mean, I think of that phenomenon as a kind of, it's a leap forward. It was coming anyway. The crisis brought it all forward. You know,
the catalyst.
It was going to happen within the next decade anyway, for other reasons. So, you know, we allowed us to experiment early and move earlier than what otherwise probably would have happened, right? That's an amazing opportunity. So,
you know, advances in sequencing, surveillance, I mean, what we learned through that process, having a global pandemic, globally, preparedness, incredible advancement in technologies and from a sort of, you know, disease management, surveillance and genomic sequencing. And the UK is a world leader in this space, so we should be very proud.
Yeah.
That's the opportunity.
David.
Thank you. I think organization, first of all, some things that, just to refer back to Chris, about like bringing to the bottom or like listening to people in the bottom.
Empowering, not just listening, empowering them.
And so it makes sense to me also because, you know, you need knowledge or experience on the ground because things are happening in real time in a crisis. So those people probably have maybe the richest knowledge, the richest kind of, the most temporally proximate information that you probably need. Also, they are maybe less stuck on old ideas. Maybe
they don't have those hang-ups, those experiences to hold them back.
Yeah. Although I don't know how you feel about delegating everything to to people. I mean, I guess you need some kind of balance, but I guess you need to empower those people.
So we say we keep our jobs.
Yeah,
probably. Yeah.
But the risk is, right, the people at the bottom are waiting for direction.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't know what to tell them because actually they're the ones closest to our customer. Right. Yeah. And so the people at the top are trying to make decisions without information, struggling, right? And then so they're trying to decide what direction to give. I mean, what I heard over and over in the pandemic was, you know, people want reassurance, they want information, and quite frankly, I don't have it. Like, so what can I, as a leader, what can I say? I'm stuck. And you know, so I kept talking to senior execs about go back to the things that you can talk about, things like core values, strategy, purpose, right?
Yeah.
in order to help people understand that we're not going to be we're not trying to do something different. We're trying to adjust to the situation, and at least it gives them some reassurance that if they're worried about how they're going to be evaluated, the same stuff is much of the same stuff is still valuable.
I think what's really interesting is in those times of crisis, there is an expectation, I think, within the business that the leaders have all the answers. Yeah. And actually, the leaders are still listening to the same radio report and the news or whatever. So actually, this is a great opportunity for everyone to say, actually, our information is coming in hot off the press. And we talk about the pandemic, but obviously this could be anything. A natural disaster. Not to get political, but some sort of political event that's preventing organisations from being able to operate. And it could be any of those. And actually the information is coming real time. And the organisation, we're kind of in it together. We need to try and get through this. And that's sort of, that comes back to sort of the authenticity of the leadership that I think is really important as you're leading through these times, is to be authentic and transparent. And you talked about communication and storytelling. I think that's critical. You cannot communicate enough during these periods of difficulty. Yeah,
true. It's very true. And how you communicate it is one of those takeaways that a leader who's a great storyteller, who can take the complex and make it simple, and everyone there is then telling the same thing. They'll tell their own version of it depending on where you are in the organisation. You might be more financial or more product or more organisational or whatever it happens to be. But that simple narrative about where we're going, it will save a business. It will make a business thrive. A confusing narrative, overcomplicating the situation. Back to the moon thing, but getting man to the moon and back in the decade. Taking the most complicated developments in history of technology and the biggest challenge ever faced and put into one tiny sentence. So everybody in NASA said, we're just there to getting man on the moon. That's my job, mopping the loos, whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, I did a case study of a bank in Egypt that was trying to survive the revolution there, right? And, there was a run on the banks. Everybody, and they were expecting, and the question was, most banks just shut the doors, shut people out. And this particular bank was like, no, we need to find a way to make sure people, to make sure they have actual liquidity even during the crisis, because that will build trust, and that's our opportunity in the long run.
Yeah, brilliant.
And so they did some amazing work, kept the doors open, and at the end of it, when everything kind of settled back down again, ended up with more deposits than what they started with before all this, significantly more, because they were able to see the opportunity and the signal that then sends about continuity. You can trust us, on this. So even if the next run happens, don't panic. You'll still be able to get your money.
Brilliant. I love it. Great authenticity, great transparency, and a simple story.
It's also an opportunity for you to reflect on your values. So at that moment, that bank had the opportunity to see, okay, who we are, who are other people, who we are relative to them. So it's an opportunity also, I think, for individuals, like during COVID, for example, we had so much time to think about our lives and like what do we want to do, what are our priorities, family, where do we want to live. I think also for organizations, it's an opportunity for thinking about where they want to go. It's almost like a break, an interruption that gives opportunity to think about where they are and what they want to be or what they could be.
So and also for organizations to pivot. Yeah. So, I don't know if folks are aware, but some of the COVID vaccine technologies were actually being developed originally for cancer therapeutics or cancer technologies. And then the companies themselves recognized that we needed to pivot. So, and then companies became very, very successful on the back of that. So, it is an opportunity to look at the technology, look at the organization, look at the values, and look at the people and the skill set. But then again, one has to just say, right, we're going to try and look at this holistically as well as the values, the mission, all of it together. I think if I could just pick up on your point about storytelling, I remember learning about this, organisational development during my MBA at London Business School, and some of the simple concepts really resonated in later years, actually, less so when I was younger. But this idea of visioning, and really simplifying the message and the product, and one of the things we learned when I was in government was I had a team of civil servants, and they weren't deep scientists. you know, they were historians, they'd majored and they had, you know, specialties in lots of different areas, and trying to really crystallize what it is we were exactly doing, the goal.
Yep.
Being very focused around the goal, the vision, the storytelling, and everyone will hopefully remember JVT, Sir Professor, I can't remember which way it goes, Jonathan Van Tam, who was the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. He used to use these football analogies on the television to explain very complex science and how we were doing in terms of progress on our COVID vaccines. So again, that really links through to the visioning, storytelling, simplifying the narrative. And whilst one is simplifying it, it's actually an opportunity to actually go, is this the right thing that we're doing?
Yeah.
Back to the values, etc.
Yeah. Lots of opportunity. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from this conversation. The opportunities to rethink who we are, what we do, but also reassure, you know, that we're not going to be we're still trying to achieve the same thing, perhaps in a different way. You can't guarantee particular outcomes, but you can still talk process, you can still talk values, you can still talk mission and purpose. And those things are the things that are needed to help and reassure people that this organization is still the organization you recognize, right? Because one thing, you know, people need a sense of assurance, stability, right, in the moment that they panic.
Yeah.
Right? Great. So how do we do that? What are what are some of the things we can do as leaders to make sure that that actually happens? David, you want to have a go?
Sure, sure. I mean, you know, it's a very broad kind of objective. How do we do? But you know, like building up what you said about reassurance or what kind of role the leader can play, I'm going to try to just take the perspective on which I've been teaching and doing research on, which is understand human behavior, which I think we're all interested in here, and it's a very important objective, I think, for leaders. And I think specifically, you know, we think of crisis as these novel situations, an uncertainty, time pressure, unexpected new problem. But I think, you know, while crises look different, human behavior in crisis is actually more predictable. So
yeah, we know exactly what's coming.
Yeah, we know, like you said, like fear, you said like the freezing, the reluctance to take risk. So those kind of things we know that are likely to happen, no matter if it's how the exact crisis looks like. So I think good leaders, I think, can anticipate how people might behave. For example, if they are likely to be more cautious, more conservative, fearful of blame, that might be anticipated, and that reassurance, you know, can come because I anticipate that to happen by my employees, by my people, by my customers, and so on. So I think a general advice would be to try to act like a buffer or like a mentor of human behavior, like knowing that, by the way, they themselves also may also behave in a certain way. So self-awareness is also important for the leaders themselves. But let's say that they do know and they are rested and they get sleep and they eat well, then they need to worry about people around them that might exhibit those less than desirable tendencies. You know, risk, we talked about that. It could also be being entrenched in one's opinions, taking extreme view, even politically. You know, we didn't want to go there, Priya, but we see now, you know, in the Middle East, parties becoming more and more extreme, and that's not conducive to finding a good path, a future path to solve some problems, including conflict problems. So that I think would be my general recommendation. Like, you know, study behavioral science, take my courses. No,
I signed up already.
You know. Yes,
but like be interested in human behavior as a leader, and see how crisis creates risks and opportunities, like we discussed, in terms of human behavior.
A good leader should be able to foresee what's coming.
You
As in with behaviour, though, with
you cannot
behaviour.
foresee the exact crisis, but you can foresee the behaviour.
But do we, as leaders, do we end up panicking just as much as everyone else and forgetting what we know and returning to the worst version of ourselves, I guess?
Definitely, but self-awareness that you would is a good first step.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, and that the importance of taking care of yourself so you can take care of others, right? Because as long as they're feeling panicked, there's more risk that we won't innovate, that people will return to old habits. And if, you know, that item that we had at the opening about taking care of other people is a serious one, right? If people feel okay, then they're less likely to engage in what we think of as stereotypical panic behavior.
Yeah.
Right? So taking care of other people does matter.
Yeah.
Right? It's non-trivial.
So our job as leaders become much more around managing people's health and well-being than it does just running a company when in times of crisis. So we have to switch our focus and attention and care. Maybe a lot of leaders just aren't armed with what it takes to be, I don't know what the technical term is, but to be able to manage someone's well-being in that work environment, as opposed to targets. Like, we've got to produce more, we've got to do better, we've got to cut costs. And one of the things that I come across and use a lot, and again, I didn't do it when I was running my business, but I advise people to do it now. It's the idea of crew resource management, and that comes from flying. I love flying. I fly for fun, general aviation, and there's a very high death rate in general aviation. It's a very dangerous sport because you fly on your own. So I'm in charge of flying the plane, navigating it, problem solving when a problem arises, talking on the radio, everything I have to do on my own, even reading the emergency checklist, which I should memorize. Crew resource management is for commercial airliners, which are very safe to fly in, because over the years of having accidents, the focus has become not the captain is in charge, and it happens the same in a medical world, in an operating theatre, the same lessons were learned, but that everyone is equal, and everyone has to question each other on what's going on, and you share the task in hand when there's a problem. So in normal flying, captain sits there and he's instructing the first officer is flying the aircraft, captain will deal with radio, first officer deals with piloting. In an emergency, the captain will take over, but then everyone is delegating roles and tasks. They have their tasks, but they will check and cross-check each other's decisions so that the human error that causes 99% of crashes doesn't happen, because I'll say, should you be reducing the throttle? Should we be going in that direction? And that's, so in business, I think as leaders, in times of crisis, we actually close in trying to be the person who solves all the problems, who is my job as CEO is to lead the company. Actually, the time of crisis is when we should be managing our crew resource better and working with the wider organisation, working with our wider teams, but cross-checking each other. So not being afraid to challenge your boss to say, this doesn't seem to be making sense, this isn't the right direction. Should you switching that off?
Yeah.
And if I could link to that, the issue there is because as leaders, sometimes you can fall into that reactive trap, which was actually the answer that came through as the very strong, point. So I think, I mentioned this earlier, but I read somewhere about this concept of listen to understand rather than to respond. And I think as leaders, it's incumbent upon us to try and understand the organisation, to listen to what our people are saying, what their needs are. I really think the self-care piece is really important, but I also think the recognition that no one's perfect. There will be times when people feel drained. There will be times when people need motivation and support. There will be times when people will have to apologise because they were tired and maybe they were a bit snappy on a Zoom call or whatever. So, I think if there's mutual respect, which goes back to the values point, and a recognition that we're sort of all in this together and no one person has all the answers and perfection is the enemy of good, all of those sorts of phrases, then one can engage with the organisation to actually move through it. And I do also, just to add to that, I think it's really important to acknowledge that can be sort of a defined time point, but generally you want to be able to have a sustainable mechanism so that after you're through this crisis, there's probably going to be another one, which you haven't anticipated. Yeah. And whether that's a product safety issue or a customer or a competitor activity or a financing or a macroeconomic or a microeconomic issue, something somewhere is going to undoubtedly happen at some point. So as much as you can, I know you're saying don't learn too much from, look backwards, should look forwards, but as much as you can bring that learning forward, that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing we do know is it will keep happening.
Yeah.
Right? There are going to be sharp left and right turns along the way. And, goodness knows exactly when it's going to come. And so, one of the bits of advice I always offer, in leadership classes is use the good times to prepare for what's going to happen. Yeah. Right? Because if you're not ready when that hits, you're behind. Right? And, what research clearly shows, amazing research showing that the quality of leadership in a firm, right, matters marginally on the upturn. It's the macroeconomics that really matter. In the downturn, It becomes the number one thing. Quality of the leadership, and are you prepared? Can you talk yourself through these issues? Don't panic. Take care of people and yourself so that you don't end up falling in these traps that we've talked about that happen so easily.
Yeah, and I guess when you look at a crisis with an organisation, it's not just about the leadership and your colleagues, your employees. It's the shareholders, or the pub. In your case, it's the public. Yeah. You know, the politicians have got to respond one way, but actually everyone behind the COVID solution has got to respond differently, and that then gives a real conflict. That leader. So how does a leader manage both internal communication and external communication, and that becomes very, very challenging because the demands are so high that actually, you know, not just folding yourself and having a breakdown of just not being, I just can't process both sides of the things, and so in the end, again, I just lock myself in and become, you know, this is what I know and this is how I'm going to operate.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to the pandemic and thinking, you know, I remember how tired people got, right? And you know, people are going to, you know, and making sure that doesn't, you know, when we get that tired, right? Are we thinking as clearly as we should be thinking, right? That's when it's so easy to make those kind of mistakes. So it's important.
Just a quick anecdote. I happened to see some CDC materials from the mid-2000s. Might be getting my date slightly wrong, but it talked about some guidance if there was to be an epidemic or a pandemic. And it talked about people staying at home even if they feel well. And there's a comment, and it says, "This will never happen, ever." And fast track,
brilliant.
You know, many years later, that is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it is really, it's nigh on impossible to anticipate what all the problems are going to be and what that turbulent time is going to look like. But if one has a good organisation with the right values and, you know, as an organisation that's been built to be resilient, with leaders who aren't expected to have all the answers, and staff who are empowered to be able to. I mean, you know, it's sort of like the cockpit where there's this red light flashing. I think, you know, and everyone's just doing what the captain said, and no one's actually pointed out that the light is flashing and the plane's about to go down.
Which luckily doesn't, for everyone's audience, it doesn't happen anymore.
No. But the point is, the individual clearly didn't feel empowered to say anything. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, there's all the stories we hear too about the nurse who didn't say anything to the surgeon when they leave you know, a piece of equipment or a sponge in there.
Yeah.
Black box thinking is the book, and it's an excellent Bible to learn how to operate in that way of working.
Yeah. You know, and who knows how much they've actually happened, but they're a really good, you know, metaphor description of what actually happens in organizations, where, you know, somewhere in the organization, somebody knows exactly what the real issues are. The challenge in the leadership role for me is always like, who is that person? Where are they? Right? The solutions are here within our organization.
Yeah, we call it it's the hippo syndrome. In a business, it's the decision is made by the highest paid person in the office, and so everything becomes a hippo answer, and breaking that way of working is a really important way of changing an organisational's values and culture and structure, and being more resilient leadership, because it isn't down to that one person, that you know, the highest paid person to make the key decisions. Yeah,
if everything goes up to the top of the tree, and that it's just down to that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's impossible, no matter who that person is, to meet all the demands and needs anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just you have to find ways to push things down, or you can't be resilient. You can't be flexible. You can't be agile, and especially in a crisis.
So one interesting thing on that point, and I'll bang the drum a bit about bottom up leadership. It's amazing how many organisations will not bring in a decent amount of young interns, not degree level, but young people who are coming in who bring a completely different view and approach on how to do things, because the structure isn't in place to take somebody who doesn't pass through a standardized kind of recruitment process. So I think a lot of businesses are held back because they just aren't willing to take a risk on a different type of recruit. And it's fascinating. Lots of companies have internships. When you look at the proportion of interns compared to full-time or hires who come through the university route, I mean, it's like 100,000 versus 500. So, you know, I do sit here as we talk thinking, I wonder what the audience is thinking, like, great idea. Have you actually sat in the business and really tried to implement these things? And clearly, we've all got great experience. So, what are the things that you could really do to make a difference? What out of all this conversation, what can we do ourselves as leaders that would really shift over time, to stop a crisis impacting our organisation?
And?
Well, I would say make interns the majority of your workforce over time and totally change the way you recruit. So that's as I just bang the drum on that, Priya, what's your...
I think it would be difficult. I absolutely agree in terms of having a diversified workforce.
Yeah.
I think it would be difficult in certain industries from a compliance perspective and just qualification, all the rest of it, for the pendulum to swing. But I think absolutely bringing in different individuals with different perspectives, different experiences, different thinking, back to the point about it shouldn't... I love the hippo analogy. I'm going to be using that. I think that's great because I think there is a real danger of that sometimes. And I think, we should absolutely learn from the younger generation, and we should, but it can also be the older generation. They just have had different life experiences.
It is a balance, don't get me wrong. I mean, the world, it's not about turning it completely upside down, but I think, that just for me, the organisations can have a real big impact on how they work by shifting the balance of responsibility and shifting the way they recruit and think. I
think the key as well is having it non-hierarchical, and that was one of the things that I think we found. Now I'm going for my organisational hat. In terms of during really difficult, challenging times, if there is a set of individuals that has access to the data that you need access to every day, you are not going to go through layers to get to that information. So you're going to have that direct line. You're going to make sure you set up, the ability to be able to talk to whoever you need to. Yeah. So I think that's really, really important. But I subscribe to trying to bring in as many diversified skill sets and experiential individuals as you can.
Well, I think particularly in times turbulence and in crisis, what research shows is that a different perspective makes you think more divergently, makes you encourage you just to rethink problems. In fact, the different perspective can be totally wrong. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yeah. It's just the idea that you get challenged with another idea and think, okay, we're not going to do that, but actually there's a core of an idea here. Yeah. Right?
So we were talking about opportunity, and I've got a bit of a quick example. Because it was COVID, no one was travelling, so it was easy access to everyone. Everyone was at home. But there was a good old-fashioned stakeholder management type event where we managed to get a number of different agencies, groups, all together, individuals who normally, and it would take months to set up this meeting. And the comment was made to me afterwards was, of course, everyone's at home. We were able to get on a Zoom call and we were able to look at policy very quickly and then change policy. I was told later that was pretty much unheard of, or would have been unheard of, because just trying to set the meeting up in the first place would have taken months.
Great. David, do you want to add to that conversation about other things to do?
No, I think, the human resource aspect is clearly very important. How you do that, like the kind of teams that you talked about in a flight, or whether it's about young people, it's not about age necessarily.
It's experience. It's about people coming in with a formed view of how business is done, and they fall into the trap of not challenging or not innovating, versus someone who comes in like the NASA control room who don't know what risk is, so they're willing to do anything to succeed, as in positive, not tread on people or anything, but they just have it's just challenge. It's a different way of thinking.
Yeah. Definitely. And maybe just lastly on your point about learning, because people have experience, we all went through one big crisis, but what do we learn from a crisis is a separate issue. Whether having gone through it really made us learn, and can we use that learning? And can we remember? How can we remember?
Yeah. Did we just survive it? Or did we grow?
Do we even want to remember it? Like sometimes just want to I frankly don't want to even think about it very much in those periods. That's not very helpful. I think, some things I should think about, what we did, what we didn't do as a professional, as an individual. So I think, looking in hindsight, we distort some of our recollections, and that makes learning more difficult.
My distortion is every great idea is mine. And I think that's a Steve Jobs problem.
And of course hindsight is always 20/20.
Always.
Right, and it is easy to be, but you have to really think back. Could you have known to do it differently?
Yeah.
Right. That's a better question than should I have done it differently? Because knowing what I know now, of course I should have done different. But could you really have known that in the moment?
Yeah, exactly.
If the answer is no, if the answer is could you have known, then you need a different kind of response, different kind of preparedness. It's to deal with something that you couldn't know, you could not have known.
Yeah.
You know, the resilience or you know, the different kind of perspectives, because the specific way that, you know, you probably would react similarly, but maybe how you deal with the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm getting some awesome questions in here.
Okay, can I
You
just
have a
mention
final-
one point, yes, that we haven't mentioned, which I think is really important from a leadership perspective, which is about having fun as well. So using humour to deflect in terms of expel extra stress or energy, negative or positive emotion. Some of our, you know, some of the times when I've been with a team and we've just had, even in the midst of complete chaos or challenge, someone has quipped a joke and everyone has just burst into laughter, and you just feel that dissipation of all that negativity and the emotion, and the ability to everyone sort of go, right, we're going to do this, and it really builds bonds, camaraderie. I think it's so important, and I really learnt that myself when I was sort of working with different teams over the years, how powerful a bit of levity, a bit of humour, a bit of fun, and just sort of, you know, even in the most serious of occasions, it's a great...
You see it with the emergency services a lot.
Yeah.
You spend time in the emergency services because you're dealing with crisis every day.
Yeah.
Dark humor.
No, actually, not dark humour, because I think that it can be misconstrued, and there have been times which have been reported in the press where it's the wrong thing. This is about finding moments of light and happiness and fun, and not forgetting that we're human beings and we laugh, and laughter makes us happy and energizes us. And because the blue light services deal with adversity every single day, then it's so important. And I think it's a great point. As businesses, stop being so bloody serious and have some fun, laugh, enjoy yourselves.
Just having finished a big study on jokes in the workplace.
Oh, okay.
Jokes can go wrong.
Yeah, fair enough.
We could do a whole session on
Fair
that.
enough.
I know, I'm with you there.
But I am 100% with you on the have fun.
Yeah.
Right? And jokes are one way, but there are other ways to think about having fun. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to pick up on a couple of these questions here. I think there's a couple of, interesting, maybe challenging ones. So, the first one is we're using the word crisis a lot.
Yes.
We've kind of slipped into that language. Clearly, COVID was a crisis, but we're in somewhat more normal times. They're saying normal times. Okay, yes. How do we react to turbulence that isn't a kind of acute, specific crisis?
I noticed that we were saying crisis, so I kept trying to move the language away from that. I think, and that comes back to the resilience point, which is change is a constant. So apologies, I'm going to be repeating a little bit what I said earlier. But I think one has to recognise that if it isn't a pandemic, it might be a political event, it might be a macroeconomic event, it might even be a product safety issue internally, or a technology failure, or it could even be an HR issue, it could be anything. There will be times where things will be more challenging and difficult than other times, and so one needs to build an organisation that can withstand that. That would be my perspective.
I think you're absolutely spot on, and I'm sorry I have to go back to flying because it's turbulence.
Yes.
So as a pilot, turbulence has no impact on the aircraft at all. It's just a body of air moving, and the aircraft moves with that air. As a passenger, you have no idea, and you are scared. Bad turbulence, very bad for passengers. Captain sitting in the aircraft, pilot sitting there, no problem at all, no issue. So what a skilled captain will do is steer around the turbulence as best they can to manage the experience of the passengers, because you don't want to upset passengers. And I think as a boss, sorry, it's a bit of a cheesy analogy, but that's kind of what you need to do as a boss, is how do you take people through turbulence, giving them confidence, keeping people calm, knowing that actually you could go straight through the middle and be massively innovative and disruptive, but you're probably going to upset a lot of your workforce, or you find a path through with least turbulence, but communicate and take people on that journey and tell them it's going to be all right. It's going to be bumpy, but it will be okay.
I actually like the analogy quite a lot.
Thank you. I've got loads more about flying, so just keep them coming.
No, but it's a good question. We did talk. Crisis, the way it's defined, it's often like a rare, significant event that can affect the stakes, the viability of the organization or society, like it did for us, for COVID, for the whole society. Often there is like time pressure. So to go to that person's question, I think it's a very good question. You can think about what are some of the elements that even in turbulent times we have. So for example, the change, I think, is a common element to normal kind of crisis. Crisis, there is a big change. Currently, we're also going through a bunch of changes, maybe multiple changes. Time pressure, maybe not, because in crisis there is time pressure. At the moment, it feels like there is no time pressure, even though things are happening that require change of direction, but maybe not like at the moment, like in the next 1 hour.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good question to think about what do we take away from our crisis knowledge or crisis experience that we can generalize to current times, and how are they different?
Yeah. Okay. I think that hopefully that answers the question. Let me pick one of the. We've got loads, so I'll pick a few here. How about this one? Somebody's pushing back a little bit on the idea of pushing down responsibility in the business. What if the current culture of the organization just won't allow for that, and people at the lower levels don't want to take responsibility?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, because it's what happens in 90% of organizations. So
Exactly.
It's atypical of the challenge faced by trying to create change, an organizational change. So I think there's two parts to it. One is stand up and be heard and push for that change. Change only happens when people take responsibility, people take a risk, take the lead on it. And if you can champion a bit of change, if you can get the sponsorship to bring in a few young people or inexperienced people in your industry and show that those people can bring something different, and for a temporary period, I can guarantee those people will stay there permanently, and it'll be the wedge that opens that sort of door to change. But it is a massive problem, and it's hard for a lot of people to take that risk because their job's on the line, because they're not measured on risk-taking, they're measured on productivity. Yeah. Phone me up and I'll come into the business and I will tell the story and show the numbers and help that person and anyone else who's interested in making that change.
Yeah, any other want to add?
No, I think, as I said before, I think some of those people will have better information. Some of the people who are closer to the ground will have, and if leadership can accept that and can use that for to improve, to get their input, to get advice from them, to get to get their ideas. I don't think you can kind of choose either us or them, but I think that recognizing that new ideas are needed, that some of the key most relevant and pressing and immediate knowledge might be elsewhere, closer to the ground rather than in our kind of higher level kind of offices maybe. That recognition, that might be one thing that leaders may need to acknowledge or accept as good leaders and not scared leaders, but ones that understand that they just need something new now, especially in those kind of times that things are changing.
I think it's both, isn't it? There needs to be empowerment at all levels of the organisation, and one also needs to remove the sort of hero mentality where people think I'm going to save the day, knight in shining white.
That's how I ran my business for years. Honestly, it's so embarrassing.
So I think it's sort of trying to get that balance whereby you're not putting all the decision making and all of the problems on the shoulders of a very small group at the top, presumably, because we assume most organisations are sort of pyramid structures, and that actually some of that is shared ownership of the problem, because then one gets shared ownership of solutions. So that's the way to look at it.
There's one very quick anecdote I'll add, just very, very quick. When I was doing some leadership training with Dale Carnegie, I learned a lot more about listening, and one of my team, I had to ask a question, what can I do less of? It's the most powerful question in business ever. Ask everyone in your business, start with your partner, your wife, your husband, and say, what can I do less of? And I had an hour and a half of my wife telling me what I could do less of. Seriously, and I was just like, and you can't speak. So I use it in the office, and one of my team, Stephanie, she said to me, can you stop answering my questions when I ask them? I'm not drowning, I'm just waving. Because every time I ask you about something, you tell me the answer, and you're right, but I'm not learning. And it was an amazing opportunity for me to change my management style to just, back to your thing, but listen, but really listen. Active listening and, you know, just taking on what's going on and then asking questions back, not giving answers. So that person feels empowered to make decisions. It doesn't solve the question that's there exactly, but as a leader, if any leader's listening, active listening is the most important, I think, leadership skill there is.
Yeah, 100% on that one.
You know, maybe just lastly on this point, I mean, other than like, you know, keeping jobs or hierarchy or structure, we should also acknowledge, relating to that person's question, that the crisis or these kind of changing times are opportunity for things to change, including structures of organizations, including power structures, including in society, like, you know, who is valued. We saw it very clearly in you know, NHS, key workers versus other people. So those kind of things got questioned because that was an opportunity for them to be questioned. And so those people that you refer to, maybe it's an opportunity for also change in the organization. Yep. I know it's a difficult one, and the person is right to say it's a difficult one, but it's something
champion that change.
Of an opportunity.
Champion change. And if it doesn't change in that organisation, go somewhere else, because they'll be respected and promoted in a different organisation that has the right culture. Easy to say, it's a bit flippant, but sometimes bravery is about stepping away from what you're in and moving into something new.
Yeah. I want to follow up on actually some of the comments here with one of the other questions about when it gets really bad, restructuring, you know, redundancies, those kind of things, when you need to cut costs quickly. On the one hand, how do you keep people motivated in a time when they start to worry about having their job?
I had this conversation today, literally with a company, an owner I coach. I had a boss at Bupa, a Canadian guy called Uwe, and I think he's the CTO at Bupa many moons ago. And I resigned to him. And he wasn't really upset and disappointed about it. And he said, you know, it's good. It's bad that you're leaving, but I'm glad you're looking for new opportunities if it's not right here for you. And I didn't realise things weren't right for you. He said, I think everyone should update their CV every 6 months. And if you're not updating your CV every 6 months, you're clearly not challenging yourself or the organisation you're working in. And again, that can be seen very flippant, but I think it's as much on us as being, you know, employees to keep pushing ourselves and pushing the business as it is for the leaderships to drive that. So on one side, I think, you know, this change, this need for, you know, decisions, you take control yourself and you free yourself in the workforce as a boss, as a leader, decisive execution of team structure and planning, i.e. if you're going to make redundancies, you do them all in one go. I've done it and I've seen people do it drip by drip and it destroys morale, but it's part of the plan. You know, if a good leader can foresee not what the problem is, but there will be a problem, what do we do when we're hit with the need to change our workforce? What do we do when we need to make redundancies? And a clear communicated plan will make everyone's lives much easier than death through 4 months of restructuring, consultation and HR talks, and it's a nightmare.
So,
please.
I was going to say, so I've run restructuring programs as well, and I have to say, I agree with a lot of what Chris has said, but I also sort of disagree slightly as well about the ability for individuals to have personal capacity to be able to cope, because I think it's quite easier the more senior you are and the more confident you are that you'll be able to go and market your skills and you've got transferable skills and be able to secure a new role. Far more difficult if you've got a mortgage and this has been your, you know, you're not really in that zone where you can contemplate the openness of the opportunity ahead. And I've had to manage people who are more in the latter as well as the former over the years. And I think, and one can give them lots and lots of advice and counsel, and there are special companies that are set up to help individuals who are going through redundancy programs, and it doesn't matter. It is grief, it is trauma, and that's how they're feeling, and one just needs to support them through that. And then equally, there is the survivor syndrome on the other side of those, because you are trying to retain a functional organisation. You know, some of the decision making can be quite challenging and difficult. And of course, you've got all the employment regulation and the compliance that has to be followed at all times too. So the whole thing is fraught with difficulty. It's not easy. I think anyone who says it's easy, personally, I don't think so. It's not nice letting people go. I've had to let a lot of people go at different times in different companies, and I think that comes back to actually linked to what we were speaking about earlier, which is authentic leadership style, the culture of trust and integrity and respect. I think the most important thing is treating people with respect. I mean, there are horror stories of literally, CEOs walking in. Thankfully, none of my companies that I've been associated with, and putting some people in one room and others in the other, and then going in and saying, to this room you're all staying and this room you're all leaving.
Or redundancy by mass email.
Or even, yes.
Or the non-invite.
Outside your office.
Or that Friday afternoon Zoom call.
But I think one has to just accept it's a reality of life. Sometimes organisations grow, they over-exceed capacity, they need to pivot, they need to change their skill set or whatever their competency base is, and that is life. All that can be done as a leader is to try and recognise that individuals respond to that differently and to help support
But could we as leaders be giving our workforce the tools to take more control? And I get it. If you have nothing to lose, you're on the start of your career, it's easy to move jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not easy, but it's less of an impact.
Yeah.
And if you're late on in your career, in a way, you've got past the point of big financial burdens, and it's less of an impact for some, but not everyone. The middle ground is always the hardest because they've got the most at risk. You know, the person I was speaking to this morning, someone's about to have their first baby, and they've got to make them redundant. 3 mortgages just being first-time mortgages just being taken out. Yeah. So there's things like that. But if, as leaders, if one of the things we can teach or empower or enable is for a workforce to have more of an ability to take their careers in their own hands, to support people moving out of an organisation and coming back in. To not make when someone resigns, you've got to work your 3-month notice period. Like, okay, I'm really sad you're going. What can we do to help you? What can we do to make life easier to move through organisations?
And actually, that's a really good point, Chris, because we've been doing a lot of that as an industry in the biotech sector at the moment, which has been decimated from a financing landscape, many technology companies. And actually, as companies have been going through these transitions, HR and the C-suite have been circulating CVs. This is a great person, I've got this project leader, networking. LinkedIn is a great way of saying I'm looking for work. So there are definitely ways to support from a practical.
Change the culture feel. Like resigning, when we all started out, the thought of resigning was bad when you're starting. When you've got a mortgage and a family, the thought of resigning is a nightmare. Yeah. Actually, moving around businesses should be an easy thing to do. We should facilitate it. Sorry.
I do agree with that.
Well, I mean, I would just add 2 things to this conversation. One, what I always say to leaders is, if making redundancies doesn't shred your heart a little bit, there's something wrong with you. Be empathetic, be understanding.
Yeah.
Because the single best predictor of what happens to the rest of the workforce is how you treat the people who are leaving.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? And over, too many leaders forget this. They forget that these people will still be in their networks. They will still be friends with these people. And if they were treated badly, that comes right back. And then you think, okay, so I'll be treated badly someday, which dramatically reduces commitment to the organization. So whatever you do, have a heart.
Yeah.
Right? David, do you want to add anything to that?
No, definitely. Especially in I completely agree. Like, I'm in academia with a very small kind of world, people know each other in other schools, and when people are mistreated or let go, or in ways that are not very respectful, let's say, that knowledge is shared so quickly, and it persists for years.
Yeah.
It's very I just
long after things have even changed sometimes, right?
That's right. So. The world is smaller than you might think in those kind of professional kind of contexts.
All right, we've got time for one more question here, and I think this one should be straightforward. Let's see. So the question is partly statement, partly question. So isn't all this talk leading to having a culture encouraging intellectual honesty and psychological safety to tide us through the turbulent times? Is that the kind of sum of it all?
Can you read the question again so I can digest it?
Isn't all this just leading to having a culture of encouraging intellectual honesty and psychological safety to tide us over the turbulent times?
No. It's about dramatically changing the way that the organizations are run, but how leaders lead, by learning from experiences and persisting in that changed behavior, not defaulting back to your worst self the next time something problematic happens. So I think it's more honest than that. It's more about wanting to actually to approach work differently, approach leadership differently, and be a different person. For me, I think that's what it should be.
Okay.
So I think there are elements of yes. So I think the safety is an interesting word, right? And I assume that's coming, again, assume that's coming from a place of, we were talking about the red light and the cockpit and the empowered, feeling safe that their careers are not going to be jeopardised, particularly if they've just pointed out to the captain that he's not flying the plane through the best way to avoid the turbulent, period. So I think there is an element of that. I think it goes to the heart, it goes to the culture of the organisation. So Chris is correct as well, that actually, foundationally, one needs to build the organisation, I'm going to bang on about this word resilience again, that can withstand the change that is coming. And these are components of it, but they're not the be all and end all. If you do, I think, those two things, emotionally, intellectually and psychologically safe, culture, it's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough. It extends beyond that.
Yeah.
Okay, David, you?
Yeah, I mean, some of the conversation touched on, feeling that you're not going to be blamed, for example. That can feel like safety, but we also talked about other needs we have. The need to feel motivated or agile, or also bring your expertise, or leaders seeking that expertise, or leaders anticipating extreme reactions or being entrenched into positions. So, I think overall, we talked about a lot of kinds of behaviors, or behaviors including about seeking opinions from others, behaviors like about how we communicate. So I think probably that comment plays a role in some of what we discussed, but maybe a broader way of understanding human behavior in crisis.
And I would say it's back to the pendulum analogy again. If the environment and culture is too safe, in a way, where is the appetite for risk? Yeah, sure. So, and actually, we've talked about, not focusing so much on outcomes and results, and you drive the behaviour around that. But actually, let's be frank, in the world we're in, companies need to survive. They do need to focus on results, and individuals need to thrive, and they should be focused on results. So it's a pendulum. It's a balance about striking the right sweet spot that works for the sector, industry, the company, the ethos, the values, and whatever it is that works for that sector, to find out where that pendulum sits, so that yes, you've got the right psychological safety, but not so safe that no one wants to put their head above the parapet because there's no value to doing so.
Yeah.
Right, so it's a kind of yes and or yes but?
Yes, I think that's right. It's
also, just generally acknowledging that the topics we talked about are very broad. How do we deal with turbulent times? When I read actually the event description, I got worried. There's so many things to say about this. So I think also from the conversation, you can probably take out a few things depending on your context. Probably some of what we said might be relevant more to some people. Some of what you said might be relevant more in other contexts. So, there is no kind of one just message here probably. There are several kind of ideas that are interrelated. and some might be more appropriate than others in a given context.
Yeah, and it takes lots of different types of people to work in an organisation and make it succeed. So some people will want exactly that, others want the challenge and disruption.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we have to end there. So to the audience, we have one final poll question for you to end today's event. So the question is, what are the most desirable qualities in a leader? Empathy, confidence, creativity, or accountability? So submit your answer using Slido. Please can you also look at that short survey and complete the short survey using the link in your Slido. Your feedback will help us shape future events here. So, I mean, overall, if I think about the conversation, we started off by talking about what is the risk, what are the problems, and we talked about that people will panic. Okay, we didn't want to use the word panic, but people will stress about this. And when they get stressed, they may not do their best work, right? They may not be as, there's a risk they can be not as open as they should be. And it also exposes any weaknesses in our risks and planning as well, all of which put the organization at risk. Now, on the other hand, there's massive opportunity here. Opportunity to restructure, rethink our organization, refresh our organization, think about new ways of working, right? Because people are open to experimentation if they feel safe enough. So, what do we need to do? Well, we need to make sure people feel like we're taking care of them, like they have the kind of core values and core of the organization to heart. And we talked about bringing in different perspectives, how important that is, right? Even if the perspective is wrong, a fresh perspective is always useful. Okay, so I think those are all great takeaways from the conversation, more complex than just a simple, strap line here. But I think, again, hopefully worthwhile. So if we go back to our results here, I think we've shifted some thinking, panel, right? Because we've got empathy, right, as the number one, followed by accountability, confidence, and creativity. Okay? So with that, I want to thank our panelists today, David, Priya, Chris, for your invaluable insights. If you'd like to view any of our previous Think Ahead events or listen to our podcast series, please scan the QR code that's on the screen now. So thank you for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you to the next event.